Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Tree Line. If this is your first time here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We explore the darkest, most unsettling real-life horror stories from the places civilization forgot. And if you've been here before, it's great to see you again, friend. Today's video takes us deep into the Appalachian wilderness, where we'll hear from 5 people who were living in complete isolation when something truly terrifying unfolded. And I have to say, the third story just might be one of the best we've ever featured on this channel. From the first time I came across it, I knew it had to be shared with all of you. You'll have to let me know what you think. So go ahead, turn down those lights, settle in, and join me as we venture beyond the tree line. And as always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. I was born in a town that barely shows up on maps, tucked between the ridges of eastern Tennessee, the kind of place where the trees outnumber people and night arrives like a heavy curtain you can't pull back. I was 6 when the incident happened, but the memory is sharper than most of my adult years. My family lived on the edge of a small mountain community. The houses were spaced far enough apart that neighbors didn't share sugar, they shared warning signs. There was an old stone ruin near the valley's edge. Not a castle, not really, more like the skeleton of one. Crumbling walls, no roof, no recorded origin. The locals called it the Watchtower. No one knew who built it or why it was abandoned so violently by time. My father believed the mountains were a testing ground for faith. He didn't just distrust the woods, he treated them like a living adversary. He said the forest whispered temptations, that anything wandering beneath the branches at night was sent to pull people away from salvation. Because of him, we never crossed the tree line when walking to church. Instead, we followed a long gravel path that bent around the hills like a cautious river. My mother held a different belief. She saw the mountains as ancient protectors. Harsh, yes, but honest. She said the land doesn't hurt you unless you disrespect it first. But even she had one rule that never wavered. After dark, we stay inside, no exceptions. The town obeyed that rule collectively. As soon as twilight bruised the sky, doors were shut, curtains drawn, and porches left empty. Not out of superstition alone, but tradition, a learned behavior passed down like an heirloom no one asked for. I grew up idolizing the older kids in town. They were louder, braver, and carried a kind of confidence that isolation breeds. One evening, while pretending to help gather firewood behind the chapel, I overheard them planning to visit the Watchtower after midnight. They spoke in nervous dares, like kids trying to frighten fear itself. They didn't know I was listening, and I knew better than to reveal myself. I packed quietly that night. Snacks, gloves, a flashlight, and a wool scarf. My plan was embarrassingly simple. Follow them, prove myself, and be accepted. I left hours before they did, hiding under old farm equipment until I saw them slip past the church boundary. They didn't notice me trailing behind them as they entered the woods. The forest at night was a different universe. Air colder, silence louder, darkness thicker. A distant sound floated through the trees, low and wavering, rising and falling like a warped melody. It didn't sound like an animal. It didn't sound like weather. It sounded like a voice trying to remember how to be one. The others heard it too, but said nothing. Pride was steering the hike now, not curiosity. When we reached the ruin, they lit a small fire and began exploring the broken archways. That's when I saw her. A tall figure draped in black, face hidden behind a thin mesh veil, standing motionless beyond the tree line. She didn't approach, she didn't breathe visibly. She simply stood, humming the same broken melody, soft at first, then louder, overlapping itself unnaturally, like several voices trying to sing through one throat. Then the humming twisted into something half song, half scream. The fire flickered violently, as if reacting, not burning. The older kids panicked. They bolted instantly, dropping branches, bags, dignity, running like startled deer in separate directions. But I didn't run. I couldn't. The sound hit me like a physical force, locking my limbs, squeezing air from my lungs, pinning me inside my own body. My flashlight slipped from my hand. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, sobbing into the dirt, convinced the mountains themselves were singing through her. And then, silence. The sudden kind that makes your ears ache. She was gone. The fire still burned, but smaller now, ashamed. I walked home alone in the early hours, every shadow convincing me I had imagined nothing. I never told anyone I followed them. That morning, my mother found me shivering on the floor, still layered in cold weather clothes. She didn't ask what happened. She simply held my hand too tightly, like she already knew the mountains had finally spoken back. A week later, one of the older boys disappeared without explanation. No search party, no investigation, just absence. In towns like ours, sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see in the woods. It's what the woods decides to keep. Some houses don't need ghosts to be frightening. Age alone can do the job. I was 12 when my family moved into a 2-story wooden home near the foothills of western North Carolina. Unlike the first town I grew up in, this one actually had a name and a post office, but not much else. The house used to belong to my grandfather. When he passed, it became ours by default, as if the mountain itself had decided who should inherit its silence next. During the day, the place was charming. Wildflowers, rusted barns, wind chimes my mother kept repairing even when the wind refused to cooperate. But at night, the house turned territorial. Every step announced itself. Every door exaggerated its hinges. The walls carried sound like a rumor it enjoyed repeating. My father traveled often for contract work, and my mother sometimes joined him when it was close enough to make sense. On this particular night, she did. They told me they'd be back before dawn, which was their polite way of saying, "Don't wait up." I nodded, like a kid who understood more than he did. In reality, I hated nights when the house got to be louder than people. I did what any nervous child does. I flooded the place with artificial courage. I turned on the porch light, the hall light, the stairwell light, even the bulb in rooms I hadn't stepped in for months. The house glowed like it was preparing for visitors it hadn't invited. Around 8:15 p.m., I made hot cocoa and sat with the TV playing an old wildlife documentary, not because I cared about mountain elk migration, but because the narrator's voice felt like company. The heater rattled, the roof clicked under temperature shifts, and for a while, it all felt normal enough to trust. Then the floorboard popped. Not the dramatic kind, just the familiar lazy creak of someone stepping on it lightly. The documentary was paused. The heater was humming. No storm that night, which meant only one thing. I wasn't alone. I convinced myself it was imagination at first. The mountains train your brain to see patterns where there should be none. But then I heard another step, slower this time, cautious, calculated. Someone was moving through the house like they already owned its blueprint. I walked into my father's study, the room he called his thinking nest. A desk, stacks of notebooks, and a stone-framed wood stove we no longer used. Beside it was an old storage compartment sealed by a warped oak plank. When I was smaller, I once discovered that behind the stove was a tight crawl space, intended for insulation access, not children, but small enough that a kid could disappear there if he tried hard enough. So I did. I slid the plank aside, squeezed in sideways, and resealed it from inside. It smelled of charcoal, cedar rot, and forgotten winter coats. My lungs burned from panic, not air loss. I heard movement, first upstairs, then descending, then circling the house interior without urgency. Whoever it was wasn't afraid of being discovered. That made it worse. A calm intruder is a confident one. I saw shadows move through the crack beneath the study door. Then the door opened. Footsteps entered, paused, shifted toward the stove, then stopped. The man was tall, boots wet at the edges, coat heavy, face hidden under a black cloth mask that swallowed the rest of his features. He bent slightly toward the stove, scanning like someone checking the last place he expected something valuable to be hidden. Me. Our eyes met through the crack. I braced for violence, screaming, anything, but instead he raised a gloved hand in a slow, deliberate motion and whispered, "Don't make a sound. Not tonight." Then he walked to the desk, rummaged briefly, and left the room without touching the stove again. That moment didn't calm me. It haunted me differently. Why warn me to stay silent if not to protect me from someone or something else? Minutes later, I heard tires grinding against gravel outside, followed by my mother's voice calling my name like a prayer she suddenly believed in again. My parents hadn't just come back. They came back frightened, which was a first for me to witness. My father's desk was overturned when they reached the study. Papers were missing. The plank beside the stove was shut again, making the fact that I had ever opened it a deception. I didn't speak for a long time, not out of secrecy, but because fear sometimes steals language before it steals sense. When I finally told them I heard footsteps, they assumed the rest without asking for details. The sheriff was called, not the police, not the state authorities. In towns like ours, law enforcement isn't a department, it's a person. And that person was already uncomfortable enough stepping into a case that involved a house older than his badge. No suspect was ever found. No motive was ever named. No explanation was ever offered. But the house changed after that. We installed new locks, motion lights, cameras, and a security system that constantly beeped like it needed reassurance, too. I eventually learned that the mountain doesn't always speak through voices in the woods. Sometimes it uses a floorboard, a mask, a warning, and a child who survives to retell it. And sometimes that warning is the scariest part of the story. We lived on a farm that felt less like land and more like the end of something. No street name, no nearby gas station, no late-night traffic, just miles of climbing terrain that folded into deeper wilderness. I was 14 when it happened. By then, I thought I knew isolation. I later learned I only knew the comfortable version of it. Our farmhouse sat on a ridge in rural West Virginia. It was built before anyone in my family was born, its beams darkened by decades of winters, coal oil lamps, and thunderstorm seasons that hit like punishment. My parents raised livestock, grew corn, kept bees, and maintained the unspoken rule that every Appalachian child eventually memorizes. Night belongs to the mountains, not us. My younger sister, Leah, was 8 then. She had the fearless curiosity of someone still too young to understand fear. Her best friend, Mara, often stayed over when her parents worked weekend shifts. But that night felt different from the start, like a script the air already rehearsed. Earlier that evening, Mara arrived soaked from rain, smiling too easily for someone dripping on the porch. My mother greeted her warmly, but there was a pause in her expression. Small, barely detectable, but heavy enough to remember. She'd always trusted sleepovers, trusted neighbors, trusted the land. That hesitation was new. At 10:45 p.m., my father received a call from an unknown number. The voice claimed his work truck had been sideswiped near the railway depot and that roadside assistance wouldn't arrive until morning. Whoever it was insisted someone had to come verify ownership before they could tow it. It was nonsense, but the storm outside made nonsense feel believable. My mother grabbed her coat and car keys. The rain smudged the headlights into shaky white swords slicing through fog. Before leaving, she locked every door, double-checked the windows, and kissed us like she was trying to memorize our faces in case the night demanded memory later. The moment her car rolled downhill, Mara stood at the kitchen window and whispered, "He's here early." I asked what she meant. She answered without turning, "Family always checks in before midnight." That's when we heard the first hit, a slow metallic click against the back door latch, then another, Someone was testing entry points without urgency, like a person who didn't fear getting caught, only feared leaving empty-handed. I pulled Leah behind me, but Mara stepped forward, barefoot, walking toward the hallway like she was greeting someone on a schedule. Leah started crying. I moved fast, faster than panic allows clarity. I grabbed Mara's arm before she reached the handle. She erupted into screaming, not terror, betrayal, like I was blocking a long-awaited arrival. My sister flinched. Mara thrashed. I yelled for Leah to help, and through tears and confusion, she did. Together, we pulled Mara backward and locked her in my room. Then came the laughter. Not from her, from outside. A low, amused chuckle that didn't belong to weather or children. Someone had entered through the basement window, the only unreinforced part of the house. The sound of boots climbed the stairs, wet and heavy, followed by slow breathing, patient and unshaken. Leah whispered through sobs, "Why is she excited?" I answered honestly, I don't think she was waiting for help. We hid in the bathroom, the sturdiest door in the house, reinforced with iron bolts meant to keep bears out, not men in masks. Then we heard the bedroom door slam. Mara started laughing from inside, hysterical, rhythmic, manic, delighted, too delighted for survival to make sense. Something heavy crashed against the wood stove in my parents' room. He wasn't trying to reach us first. He was trying to reach her. That distraction saved us, not because distraction is merciful, but because it is practical. I heard sirens winding up the ridge, distorted by rain until they felt unreal. But when the bathroom door finally broke open, it was officers, not family, not folklore, not mountain judgment. My parents had called them. They explained later that when they arrived at the railway depot, my father's truck was fine, but the tires had been slashed clean through. That made them suspicious enough to assume the worst and call authorities before returning. They saved us without knowing exactly what they were saving us from. Mara was taken away for a psychiatric evaluation that same night. Her parents vanished from town soon after. Weeks later, a masked man matching the description was killed during a convenience store robbery in central Pennsylvania. But no one ever confirmed if he worked alone or if Mara truly knew him. What frightened me most wasn't the attack. It was this realization. Some children aren't protected by the night. Some are recruited by it. And some mountains don't whisper warnings, they file visitor logs. I never saw Mara again, but every winter when storms hit the ridge, I still remember the sound of calm breathing in a house full of screaming, and a girl walking barefoot toward a door she was never meant to open. The mountains where I grew up weren't scenic postcards. They were tall, quiet judges covered in trees. Our town sat along the border of northern Georgia and southern Tennessee, squeezed into a valley locals nicknamed Black Pine Basin. It wasn't named for tourism, it was named for truth. The pine trees there grew so densely that sunlight had to negotiate its way through branches like a visitor asking for permission. My family lived in one of the oldest houses in the area, a two-story farmhouse with faded green shutters and a wraparound porch that no one used past evening. My grandparents built it long before the county got paved roads, back when kerosene lanterns were emergency technology, not decoration. Even as a kid, I could tell the house carried stories the way old fabric carries smoke. My parents ran a small produce business. Most days it was peaches, apples, wild honey, and homemade preserves. On weekends, we set up a roadside stand at the bottom of the ridge. People came for the fruit, but they stayed for the conversations, weather predictions, church announcements, and the occasional missing person rumor spoken softly enough not to spoil the sales. Because out there, fear wasn't dramatic, it was polite. We had a rule at home that doubled as town policy: no wandering outside after the evening bells. There were no actual bells, of course, but when dusk fully arrived, it felt like a signal ringing through the air, a shared understanding that the human shift was over and the mountain shift was beginning. I was 13 when I broke the rule, not rebelliously, but embarrassingly. I was chasing acceptance. The older kids in town had started daring each other to hike up Black Pine Ridge at night. They swore something strange flickered near the old mining trail, an abandoned route that once led to coal pits sealed after a collapse decades earlier. No signs, no barricades. The ridge handled its own warnings. One Friday, I trailed them quietly from a distance, carrying a small battery flashlight and a rusted hand-me-down lantern I found in the barn. It barely worked, but it made me feel older, braver, chosen. Halfway up the ridge, a fog rolled in. Not cinematic mist, but thick gray wool that swallowed direction. The older kids froze, staring ahead at a faint yellow glow bobbing in the trees. My lantern began flickering in response, its flame jerking like it recognized the other light as competition. Then came the singing. Soft, unsteady, ancient. The melody wasn't sad or angry. It sounded homesick for a mouth that no longer existed. The older kids scattered immediately, stumbling downhill, pride dissolving into panic. I tried to run too, but the fog felt heavier around me, like the mountain had placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Not you, stay." The singing grew louder, the yellow glow drifted closer, and when the fog shifted just enough for shape to appear, I saw a figure holding a lantern that burned too steadily to be fire, too warmly to be natural, and too personally to be coincidence. I don't remember her face, not because it was hidden, but because my brain refused to record it. I remember dropping the lantern. I remember falling backward into wet pine needles. I remember crying without sound, like sound itself had been temporarily suspended. And then it stopped. No fade out, no footsteps leaving, just an abrupt ending, like a record needle lifting itself. When I finally reached home near morning, my clothes smelled like cold earth and extinguished matches. My mother found me sitting on the porch steps, shaking, the way you shake when your body knows more than your words can explain. She didn't scold me. She only said, "Some lights don't guide you home. Some lights check if you belong there." 2 months later, a volunteer search crew found an old lantern on the mining trail, the exact model my grandfather used to carry. The wick was burned out, but the glass wasn't broken. No one knew how it got there. But I did. I never told the ridge I was sorry. You don't apologize to judges. You survive them quietly and hope your name never makes the visitor list again.
The Appalachian woods don't roar, they remember. We lived in Singing Creek Hollow, a small settlement in southwest Virginia, where the forest felt like part of the family tree. My mother inherited our farmhouse from her father, a quiet man who carved his beliefs into routine rather than sermons. The house sat on a hillside above a slow-moving creek, surrounded by maple trees, thorn bushes, and barns older than the county's zoning laws. The nights there weren't dark because of the sky. They were dark because the trees finished the job. My father worked long hours at a sawmill in the next county over. My mother managed the farm, the books, and the fragile ecosystem of keeping 2 kids fed and 1 house standing. I was 15 then, old enough to lift hay bales, young enough to believe bravery was a currency. My little brother, Noah, was 9. He was the kind of kid who asked questions the world didn't want to answer. One night, as we were shutting the windows against an approaching storm, he said something that felt like a pebble dropped into still water. "Do you think the woods ever listens to us?" I laughed it off, but my mother didn't. She paused just long enough for silence to have a shadow. It started raining at 11:17 p.m., the kind of rain that sounds like fingers drumming on the roof when everyone else is asleep. I was awake, scrolling on my cracked screen phone, when I heard something underneath the storm, a rhythm with intention. A knock at the door. 3 slow taps, a long pause, then 2 more. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hesitant. It sounded like someone practicing patience as a warning. I grabbed the shotgun my father kept mounted above the pantry door, not because I planned to shoot,
but because metal in your hands feels like courage borrowed from adulthood. My mother stepped out of her room seconds later, already dressed in boots and a coat. She moved like someone responding to a history she never told us. I told her to stay back. She ignored me with experience. Through the rain-blurred window, we saw a man standing on the porch. His coat was dark, soaked through, hood pulled low. His posture was too relaxed for someone caught in weather this brutal. My mother whispered, "He's not lost. Lost people look around. He already knows the view." I asked who it was. She said she didn't know his name. That was the problem. The knock came again. Same rhythm, same spacing, same unsettling courtesy. Noah started crying from behind me. The man didn't react to the sound, which meant the sound wasn't new to him. Then he spoke, voice calm enough to survive the storm. "Just checking in. No trouble. No introduction. No reason. No warmth. Just an announcement." My mother called the police while I kept the gun aimed at the floor, realizing for the first time that a weapon doesn't make you brave, it only makes you responsible for the ending. The officers arrived 18 minutes later. When they stepped onto the porch, the man was gone. Not fading into fog, not sprinting into legend, just gone, like a sentence erased before the ink dried. The officers checked the perimeter, the barns, the creek bed, the dirt trail leading uphill. Nothing. No tracks, no cigarette butts, no disturbed mud. One officer said something I will never forget. "Out here, the scariest stories don't leave evidence, they leave corrections." That night I finally understood my mother's silence earlier. The woods had listened to us, and it had answered in a language that didn't need sound. We didn't sleep for days, not because of the man, but because the house felt heavier afterward, like awareness itself had moved in and put its boots by the door. And every night since, when storms hit the hollow, we still lock the doors, not out of fear of what knocks, but out of respect for the quiet things that don't need to.